So the food that we eat, where does our food come from, guys? You could probably give a lot of answers to that question. So let's give some answers. The soil, yes. From God, absolutely. That's number one. And He uses the soil, absolutely. Where where do where does it seem to commonly come from today? Grocery stores. Yep. Is it it's not grown in a grocery store though, is it? No. No, it's chili. That's true. We get what's really unprecedented that has never happened in the history of the world that I'm aware of, at least after the flood. We know Solomon says there's nothing new under the sun. So a lot of things that we think are unprecedented probably have already happened to some extent, maybe to a greater extent, but we can get foods now year round. That's never ever happened, before. Think we ate seasonally. So you can go to a store and you can always get apples, you can always get I think you can even always get grapes now. It's just crazy things. I saw sweet corn in the store when we were actually coming out here. I think it was in Mina. And it was like, oh yeah, of course, they're pulling that from somewhere in the southern hemisphere. So we have this global food system now. And so there's no longer, the term out of season, I guess, it's out of vogue. It's not fashionable anymore. So are there consequences to this? Is this, yeah, absolutely there are. And we can only, again, there's a lot, and I'll go into this in other presentations, but there's a lot that we can learn from the fact that we were placed in a garden. And we'll look at Genesis, and again, another talk, and we'll see we're going to just look at and talk a little bit about what did that garden look like based on what we see in Scripture, and maybe in some spirit of prophecy. But anyways, yes, our food today is drastically different. And in fact, not only is it drastically different, but as much as in some cases it is kind of cool that you can get, sweet corn now at this time of year, or you can get, cherries during the winter because they pull those from somewhere in the southern hemisphere. What we fail to realize, because we have been, our roots, we've been disconnected from our roots, and we don't, for the most part, there's exceptions to the rule, but we don't really take responsibility anymore for at least knowing where our food comes from, let alone growing it. I mean, I would argue we really got to even focus more on that, taking responsibility for growing our own food again. If we really want to reflect God's character as best we can, we know we need to take care of the physical body so that we can understand what He's trying to say to us. And to best take care of this body, in today's age, even if you ate all organic out of the store, maybe this is a bit hard to hear, maybe not. It's not going to cut it, So we, despite our best attempts today in trying to eat clean, if the food that's grown that we get in the store, even if it's organic, is grown in depleted soil that has been subjected to practices that are according to a whole way of thinking that isn't of God's kingdom, there are consequences to this kind of thing. And so one of the consequences that I want to focus on in this talk is a loss of diversity. So it's, Jeremiah 17, is it 17:9 or 17:6? The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. What is it, Gary? 17, we're going to say 17 in 17, Jeremiah 17. Yeah, if somebody finds it, tell me if it's a specific verse. But anyways, so that self-deceit, what does that mean? What does it mean to be self-deceived? Willfully ignorant. It means we think we know, but we really don't know. So our grocery stores are the epitome of that with our food. We kind of operate on this assumption, unless you've had background in agriculture, naturally this assumption, well, the best that man has to offer is going to be there in our grocery stores. It's just that's what I assumed. I mean, maybe everybody else is different. But hopefully when we look at this and with what I'm about to share, we can come to, we're going to be shocked a little bit. Yeah, you got it. 79, thank you, sister. But hopefully we'll be encouraged, by the time this is all said and done. So I want to just start. I've got a couple of really interesting statistics here about the loss of diversity, genetic diversity within our food in general. I'm going to read this one first. This was taken from a research report by the World Wildlife Federation in 2006. Crop genetic diversity provides important resources for food security. Obviously, because if everything is of the same genetics, what happens if disease comes? It's all gone. It's all gone. And then, in turn, we won't eat. So in addition to that, food security, environmental sustainability, and economic stability. Yet, according to the UN, the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, 75% of the genetic diversity of agricultural crops has been lost in the last century. 75%. I mean, we knew we were going down into the pits in every area of our lives. You can see with the way the world is going, everything is struggling. But I think we haven't realized quite how bad it was, especially with our food. At least that's been my revelation over the last few years. Just continuing on with that. Due to the abandonment of genetically diverse traditional crop, this is a term that we'll look at, land races. It basically means it's preserving diversity, genetic diversity within a crop. And we'll talk a little bit about that. In favor of genetic uniformity of modern crop varieties. Now, there's advantages to having genetic uniformity, right? It means consistent harvest, consistent yields, more dependability, so that you can have more profit. That's what it's about. I mean, if you have a global food system, I mean that means that your food, we're no longer, each region, especially here in the developed world, in the West, in the U.S., I've heard something crazy. Maybe somebody can help me too. The vast majority of the produce we eat in this country, I've heard like 80+%. I guess I would say in season, 80+%. I don't know what out of season, but do you guys know where it's grown in this country? Where is it coming from? 80+% of our produce that's grown in season is coming from California. Are our soils, is the soil bad here? Can we not grow vegetables? Can not grow them where I'm from in Wisconsin? Can we not grow them in the East? I mean, what's going on here? Why are we we're putting all our eggs in just one basket? And so that's part of the uniformity again. I mean, it's this, and California is the birthplace of the modern organic food movement too. And so you had the same issue. It's not any better. Organic, the only way industrial organic is better is because at least it's the lesser of two evils, and that they're spraying it with less toxic things, right? Or they're putting less toxic fertilizer. That's true. So if we can, I would encourage that, but the best thing is to grow our own food and then to learn how to grow our own food. But anyways, here is another paragraph from, I think, that same quote. All over the world there are fruits, nuts, and other foodstuffs vulnerable to genetic fortune. The story is usually the same. Commercial fruit growers have concentrated on a handful of varieties, so just a few, discarded everything else. They've bred the chosen few to maximize yield or for some specific trait that they most value. So maybe that's sweetness, maybe that's crispness, maybe it keeps longer. In the process, the plant's natural ability to withstand pests and disease has been undermined. Meanwhile, the genetic stores of old varieties and wild relatives alike have often been lost. So a lot of that diversity that 75% that we've lost in general across all of our food, a lot of that's unrecoverable. Like we will never be able to recover that. Some is, but the vast majority isn't. Most of the time, commercial planters spray their way out of the trouble. But sometimes, this guy says here, Michael stumbled onto the sprays prove useless and the crop is doomed. So here's another interesting, we're going to talk some specifics now to show you the loss of diversity in a few specific crops. Our grocery stores only carry an alarmingly small sample of what is But if we don't study what is available to us and immerse ourselves in nature, we'll never know. And so I'm going to share with you guys a couple of those things. Let's talk about one of the things we can get all year round all the time that almost everybody gets on a regular basis. What do you think that is? Bananas. Yes, exactly. This blew my mind. This absolutely blew my mind. Well, I'll even elaborate on this more, but we'll start here. Okay, so it's a breakfast staple, key ingredient in most smoothies. There's an estimated, wow, this just shocks me. How many varieties do you think there are out there today of bananas? Let's just take some guesses. Okay, yep, it's a little bit more than 3.
Because I know
Sure.
in South America we have 3 different varieties in our plantation.
Cool. Any?
The Platano, the Guayaquil, and the little fingerlings like that.
Okay. Any other guesses?
5.
Okay, we're gonna go a little bit higher.
100.
Higher.
40.
I'll tell you, this is amazing. Okay, this is today now, so there were probably more before. There are an estimated 12,000 varieties of seedless bananas. 12,000. And yet, in America today, and in most of the Western world, we primarily have one. That's the Cavendish. Then that banana, I need to have an appropriate word to describe it. It's far inferior to what we even had available commercially before it. There was a banana before that Americans, some of the more seasoned folk in the room have had this banana. I don't know, you wouldn't have known it at the time. I think it probably started phasing out in the 70s. Don't quote me on that time window, but it was called the Big Mike in English. And that banana was like, from what I understand, hands down, there was no comparison between that and the Cavendish today. The flavor on that thing was sensational. But they couldn't grow this commercially anymore. Why? Because of what we were just talking about already. This narrow band of genetic diversity and large-scale plantings of just one type of anything, guess what happened? Disease, fungal disease. And so it started, I don't know if it started in China or where, but it just made its way around the globe. So they had to completely abandon this thing. And that's where I know the Cavendish was found in China. And then, they scramble, because when disease hits a staple commercial crop, like who's heard of citrus greening? Has anybody heard of that? Greening, it's a bacterial disease that I think was carried on some sort of insect. I haven't researched it a lot, but that's like sending shockwaves through the citrus industry right now. That it has potential to just utterly decimate citrus in this country and in the world, actually. And it prevents the fruit from ripening and the trees eventually die. So like right now, if you're in Florida, for instance, you can only get citrus. If you want to grow it in your home, you can only get it from a select few nurseries that have been certified via, I don't know if it's the USDA or what, that they're free of this disease. The only way they can certify it, and they can only do it for a period of like 3-month guarantee, massive doses of very dangerous chemicals that they put on these plants. So, and after 3-4 months, there's no more guarantees. It wears off. Yes?
Right now it's touch and go with the Cavendish too.
Yes.
There's a disease hitting the Cavendish, and if it goes worldwide, we're going to have to go to a different variety.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. So they're watching. This is the case, guys, with all this stuff that's in our grocery stores. Now let's switch to probably one of my favorite fruits here, which is very iconic in America. What is the iconic American fruit? Apples. That's right. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of stuff I can say about that too. So I'll just start by variety here. How many? Well, okay. For those of you who heard, but probably Gary and Carolyn primarily before, so refrain from speaking. I'll show pictures. We'll get there. How many varieties of apples were available to us in the beginning of the 1900s? Higher. Higher yet. And this is just America we're talking. Okay. By 1910, there were 16,000 named varieties of apples. 16,000 in the United States. of which the apple, the birthplace of the apple isn't even in this country. And that's what I'll show you guys some pictures and stuff. Johnny Appleseed, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and he was I don't know what sect or denomination, but he was a Christian man. He was not in favor of grafting, so he planted all these seedlings, just seeds. That's the whole apple seed thing. And that's how you got that many varieties. That's the only way you get all these varieties is by seed. And so in the case of the bananas, which all the bananas we eat, except for plantains, although they might even be seedless, there are very few bananas that people eat today that have seeds. They've just found mutations in the wild that don't have seeds, and then that's what you just clone by taking cuttings of it, and you just keep spreading it and spreading it and spreading it. Most other crops in the world, although they certainly, the industry, the food industry loves seedless stuff. We see seedless grapes, we see seedless watermelons, more and more seedless fruits. But, I would argue that there's a danger in that, in trying to move everything to be seedless. That's not what it says in the Bible in Genesis. Every fruit that bears seed, right, after its own kind. So back to the apples here. Do we know, some of you guys know the answer to this, where is, in what I'm about to talk about here with the food that we eat, we're talking about the origins of this food, like the best that science knows post-flood. Now, they're not going to attribute this to the flood, by the way, obviously. The secular world, no, they deny it. Even though every country that you ever look at, and when they describe the geology and the history of the country, they all say at one point it was covered in an ancient sea. What was that? That was the flood. Absolutely. The highest peaks of the mountains in Everest, anywhere in the world you go, it has fossil evidence of crustaceans, of life from the ocean. So anyway, so we're talking about food, the origins of food, the best that man knows today since the flood. So where do we think apples came from? The modern apple, the ones we get in the store today. We have crab apples that are native to this country, by the way. There's crab apples in other areas, but we're talking about the big guys. They all come from one region of the world.
Somewhere around Tajikistan.
That's it.
Uzbekistan.
He's got it. Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, something Istan, the Istans. And then it even touches Western China. So that's where the apples that we have, the 16,000 varieties, originally started there. And then you have the Silk Road, you have Alexander the Great, and then you have the Romans just keep spreading in through Europe. And then obviously eventually when people came over, probably first with the Jesuit missionaries, but then everybody who followed the Puritans, the Pilgrims, are all bringing apples to this country. And so the American icon isn't even American.
And how many do we have now?
Oh, that's actually right here. Thank you for bringing this is going to blow your minds. Okay. So there were 16,000 by 1910 of name varieties. So that means that there were, for every name variety, I have no idea what the math would be, but there's got to be at least, if I had to guess, 100 other varieties, because every time you plant a seed, it becomes slightly different than its parent, sometimes majorly different, depending on how it was pollinated. So name varieties are just primarily ones that they said, oh, I like this one for this quality because it keeps good, or because this one makes good applesauce, or because this one is a good dessert apple, so we're going to name it. So that means there were that many more apples. Every single apple tree that wasn't grafted or cloned is a unique apple. And when I was in, well, let me finish this thought that Carolyn reminded me of, and then I'll describe that. So today, 9 out of every 10 apples that we eat comes from only 12 varieties. So in 100 years, we've gone from 16,000 down to 12. Man's wisdom is as foolishness. That's what this is telling me. And so where I spent the last year or so in Wisconsin before I moved down to Talking Rock, we were in Bayfield, and that's up right on the Lake Superior, right on the Bay of Superior that touches the northernmost part of Wisconsin. That is where you'll find the northernmost commercial apple orchards in the country. And they're small scale now. They're not what they once were, but they're still there. What's really interesting about that place is that everywhere I drove out there, this isn't the case in every apple growing area in the country. I haven't seen it down where we are by Talking Rock. Just north of Talking Rock is a town called Ellijay. That was kind of the center of apple growing in the south. That's where everybody in the country would go to get the first apples of the year. And they bring them back to wherever they're going. And but I haven't seen so far there what I saw up there in Wisconsin. They grew up there like weeds, and that every country back road you would drive in that area, there were apple trees growing along the side of the road. Thousands upon thousands and thousands of wild apple trees that are just dropping fruit year after year, and it's just going to the wildlife or rotting. Nobody picks them, nobody touches them, because they say, oh, you've all heard this, oh, you don't want that, they're full of worms. In some cases, sure, there's some worms in there, but in a lot of cases, these were big, beautiful apples without blemishes that tasted incredible, better than what we have in the stores. And so this is all out in nature for us. There's still, again, despite the curse of sin, we know that it still shows God's love. And one of the greatest expressions of his love is the food that he's given us in nature. So it still exists in many places today. So back to the origin of apples, Kazakhstan area, Tajikistan. This picture actually is some of the area of what it looked like with where the apples are coming from. There are wild apple forests. Today you can go over there, not just wild apple forests, we'll get into some of the others. A lot of these fruits are found alongside each other, a lot of the common fruits we grow, and they're all found in this region. Now let me ask you the question, why this region? Where was this in relation to the ark? Do we see what we're saying here? Maybe we're somewhere near that area, and that from there it radiated out. And we have some inspired writings that suggest we know the three ways by which plant life was preserved. You had obviously Noah kept certain varieties of plants in addition to animals on the ark, and we also know that in Patriarchs and Prophets it tells us that in God's providence, he literally preserved, or he hid seeds in crevices and areas in the rocks, so that after the flood it appeared to spring up out of the rocks. And thirdly, it even says that he preserved choice trees. Because what did the dove bring back? So that tells me that there was a living olive tree that was preserved. And so who knows whether the apple was preserved in that manner or not. But I think it's interesting, and it's not coincidental that the vast majority of the temperate foods, tropical foods, are coming out of different areas. The vast majority are coming from this region. So here's a couple of cool pictures. This is just an heirloom variety. It's called the Yates apple. It actually originated as just a chance seedling that they came across in North Georgia. It's a little apple, so that's why this thing fell out of commercial production. Nobody wants small apples to sell. But this thing would keep, and we ate this. This picture I took, this was in June. These apples, they were ripe in the last November, and they kept that whole season all the way to that point, and they were still crisp. And so we've lost so many amazing qualities. Here's just some different ones that I found. A famous nursery man by the name of Jim Lawson. He's 91 years old. He's just south of us, and he had came across his abandoned orchards. It was not his orchard, his nursery. And he had leased the land, and then the land went up for sale, and the new owners didn't want to allow him access anymore. But then it changed hands again, and I've met the owners, and they said, oh yeah, come out here and just look around. So just some of the beauty of some of these apples. These were early apples. I got these were ripe the end of June. And these were amazing. They were nice and tart, a little bit of sweetness to them. I don't know what varieties they were, but just giving us an idea. None of these are in the store. Look at that. Pink in there. Yeah, absolutely. And that one might be a variety called Pink Pearl that they grew somewhere out in California, I believe. There's a guy by the name of last name Eder. He was kind of a famous fruit breeder. Burbank also came from that area too. Luther Burbank, for anybody who knows anything about fruit breeding. And just some of the different varieties that I found in this abandoned orchard. Here's just another sampling of, man, this is fun. It's like, what did you guys dub this? You named this like the wine tasting for Adventists. So we just got a bunch of different varieties of apples, some that I found, some that we ordered from a couple like mail order catalogs, just to try to see, well, which ones would we like that we potentially would want to grow. And so it's just a small sampling there, but none of those you'll find in the store.
Oh, go back.
Yeah.
The one on the right, those were those black.
Yeah, there's a cool one called, we're in that state. I should talk about that. Thank you. You guys have one of the most amazing apples that I've ever had here, the Arkansas Black. Heirloom apple. Yeah, some of you probably remember. I see some heads shaking there. That apple's awesome. It's a good keeper. I still have them. So they ripened in November where we were, and I still have it in the refrigerator right now. And they're really, really, really hard at first. They're like rocks. But they kind of soften up a little bit every time. They still have a good crispness. But they have, the flavors vary from like vanilla to kind of like vinous, like almost wine, cherry. I got like hints of almond. They're really amazing, and it's a nice kind of like tart, sweet apple. And that's one, again, I would recommend, for anybody who's interested in starting to grow some of their own food, maybe grow some trees. Arkansas Black is a good one. It's a long-keeping apple, so if you want something you can keep for a while, and it's a late ripener, and so that's just something you can consider. Here's just some more. Those are more Arkansas Blacks right there. That's just I got seeds. So that little pot with the really cool like flamish colored foliage in the fall, but still a couple green leaves on top. I just thought it was cool. I want to take a picture, but I grew that from seed, so I don't know how the apple will be. But that's from seed that I found from a nursery that was getting their seed from that area where these wild apples are. So I'm going to be growing some and seeing how they do, growing from seed. So these will become huge trees because the wild apple forest there, some of these trees, guys, are the size of, you could argue the size of like small oak trees in some cases. They'll get 60 plus feet tall. The bases of these trees are like over a couple of feet wide. Just massive, massive. This is a forest where they have varieties. They have every different color, imaginable, every size, imaginable, every flavor. They have, a lot of them have no disease issues at all. And are these things being fertilized at all? Are people applying conventional chemicals of any? No. So how is that possible? Because conventional agriculture tells us your soil is lacking, it's deficient, it's poor, you need to add. But yet how can this happen? There's something that God's trying to teach us, I think.
And where did you get those seeds?
Oh yeah, those seeds from I got. If anybody wants any of this information, I'll be happy to get it to you. But this nursery, they're like specifically a seed company. Were for perennials, and they were, I think, F.W. Schumacher is the name of the company.
They had some from over there in Caucasic.
Yeah, in that area, and I'm looking for more. The USDA. This is about the. I was pleasantly surprised. If you really want to delve into varieties of things that you can't even find in most nurseries, our government, see, this is the part of the great deception. Our government cares about the diversity of all this food. They've been sending scientists over to these wild apple forests since the 90s, and they've been bringing back genetic material, and they're preserving this. They call them repositories, genetic or germplasm repositories. Fancy name for we're actually growing out the different varieties so we have living specimens to preserve the genetics. And what's cool, what they don't necessarily advertise, is that you can get, it's not that I can't say they're intentionally holding the fact that they have this available, it's just that nobody cares because the media doesn't talk about it, and since we get all of our news from the media, you never find it. But they have repositories in different places, like for tropical fruits and other things. You've got UC Davis, you've got Florida's a repository for like mangoes, you've got up there in Cornell in New York, a lot of the more temperate plants, and then over in Oregon. So you can write into these guys. They have their catalogs on the USDA website, and you can get varieties so you can get scionwood, budwood. So you either need to know to graft, or you got to find somebody who can graft for you. You can get seeds too, and you can get this for free. They'll give you this stuff for free. So there's an amazing amount of stuff that we can have access to. Who knows? That's funny. Yeah, I was just going to say, who knows what that fruit is? Yeah, pawpaws. Who's had a pawpaw besides? Well, yeah, you can raise your hand, Gary and Carolyn. You guys have had pawpaws. Okay. Did you plant them?
No, they were there when we moved there. They're along the river. The water goes deep into the water.
Absolutely. Do you enjoy them?
Oh, yes.
How do you describe them? What do they taste like to you?
Like a pudding. Yeah.
It's like if you guys have ever had, before you didn't, or maybe if you do still eat dairy and you eat ice cream, but if you did, I don't think the chain is down here. It started in Wisconsin, but there's a chain called Culver's, and they made this custard. That custard is imitating what, in my opinion, what a pawpaw actually tastes like. They're phenomenal. Sometimes you get mango kind of flavor. Some people say a little bit banana, but I don't think it's much banana. I think it's better, but it's just, you can't describe it any other way than it's like custard. Vanilla-y, creamy, sweet. So, and that's something that is found. This is the largest native fruit to our country. And it's a fruit that grows, like our sister said there, along in the floodplains, along streams and rivers. And there's one just down the road here. I just found one. It's in flower. It's got these little beautiful purple maroon flowers. I think I have a picture actually. And it's native from about eastern Nebraska, Kansas, south all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. And it goes as far north as like southern Wisconsin, southern Michigan, even into southern Ontario. But it's like the fruit. It's like the greatest fruit that nobody's heard of. The only reason you know of it is if it wound up on your property, or if you or your grandparents or somebody had them when they were a kid on their property. But the reason why we never see this fruit is because it doesn't hold up readily to commercial production. It's not something that can be shipped and held in storage very long. It will last at maximum in your refrigerator 2 weeks. And so they can't work with that. They're trying to develop, see with everything, we're always trying to exploit. So there's a resurgence and an interest in this fruit in this country, and so they're trying to figure out, how can we develop ones with thicker skin that can last longer, and then we're going to commercialize it, and we're going to make it popular. They've been trying to do this. People promoted this in the early 1900s, like this is going to be the big fruit, and they tried and they failed, and now they're trying again. So the point is this is an amazing fruit that everybody should be growing in your backyard. It's native here. Like I said, I've seen them, and that sister there says they're in her along the stream in her yard. Okay, so here's some. I went. There's the flowers. This was on our way over here in eastern Arkansas at Village Creek State Park. Yeah, you get these maroon flowers. They're really beautiful, kind of subtle. The fruit ripen at the earliest, like down here, late July at the earliest, but into August and early September. That's kind of the main window. I found those out. I did some hunting. I like to go, I used to hunt animals, but then I became an Adventist. I gave that up, and now I hunt for fruit. And so I went to Kentucky because the belt, the pawpaw belt, if you will, they really seem to be in abundance from like southern Illinois, southern Indiana, southern Ohio, kind of central and eastern Kentucky, Virginia, Maryland, West Virginia. That's really where they grow. They're the predominant understory in some forests. You just trip over them, and they just fall all over the place. They just fall and rot. Well, that was the case in Berea. I went to Berea. It was right at the university. They're at Berean University, which used to be a pretty famous, I think, back in the early 1900s. I don't know when it was founded, but a kind of true education-based school, where they were teaching true biblical education. But they've long since abandoned that, as has every other university. But they had a little area along some stream, and I was just walking because I just keep my eyes open, and the whole forest along that stream was just pawpaw trees. And the crazy thing is, there's trails, so nobody paid it any attention. There's just fruit that were just dropping into the creek, all above the trees. And the best way to get these things down, if you can't reach them, you just shake it, and they just rain down on you. You just have to go like this. And so that I came out of there with probably 100 pounds of pawpaws. Yeah, it's such a blessing. So there's that. Okay, who knows what this fruit is? Persimmons. Do we know what variety this might be? Yes, it's the American persimmon. So we are familiar, well, most of us are with the big ones from the store. Those are Asian. Those originate in Asia, and they grow well here. And so you can grow those here too, which is great because they give you. There's varieties where you can eat them when they're still hard, like an apple, like the Fuyus. People have probably had that. So if you don't want to wait for it to get really soft, and you get the sweetness without that like paper mouth bitterness, if you've ever had an unripe persimmon, especially with the American ones, they're amazing once they're ripe, but you don't want to touch them before, probably at least before. Well, some of them ripen before frost, but you don't want to get them when they're not ripe. Yes, absolutely. So that's another tree that grows. It grows all over here natively. I've seen it. I was just walking down the road. I did the Sulphur Springs Loop the other day, and there was a line where just solid persimmons along the road. And now persimmons, like some trees, when you're trying to figure out what to grow, some need another variety for pollination. Some need another variety because they're male-female. That's the case with the American persimmon. The females produce the fruit, but you need the males for the pollen. So if you're going to grow the American persimmons, that's something you got to keep in mind. But it's definitely something I would encourage you guys. Again, you can grow the bigger Asian ones. You can't grow all of the ones that are available there because some of them, it's a little too cold here, but you still get a good variety. You can get the Fuyus, or you can get the other ones that you want to let ripen and get soft. But the American persimmons are awesome too. We're planting those, and we got Asian ones that we planted as well. And what's cool about these is they're very, very disease resistant. See, part of what we have available today because of the loss of genetic diversity, they're extremely susceptible to disease. So like, I'm sure you guys are all familiar if you've tried to grow peaches here and stone fruits like sweet cherries and plums. A lot of times they succumb to brown rot or different diseases like that. But yeah, we have native plums here that don't succumb to that at all. So again, it's because man has tampered less with the native ones than those. So it's not to say that we shouldn't try those. It's just that we got to do some homework and find the varieties that will give us the best shot. And then we can grow it in a way where we work with nature to where their immune function is higher than when they're grown conventionally. And so there's a lot of things that can help us to get good fruit consistently, free of disease. Who knows what this is? I'll give you another picture. Hold on. Wait, and if you do know, well, okay, let me preface it. Gary and Carolyn, don't tell me. Here's another picture. Any ideas?
Is that a cherry?
Somebody said it. Who did it? Not the cherry. Hardy kiwis. Guys, this fruit, again, I'm telling you, we're cursing ourselves. They're like little, fruit snack size, about this big. These blow the fuzzy kiwis that we in the store out of the water. The fuzzy kiwis, they're just like flavorless compared to these. These are so intensely flavored, sweet, a little bit of tartness to them, but really sweet. They're amazing, and they're prolific growers. You can grow these things anywhere in this country. You can even grow them up into zone 2, like even into Canada. They're so hardy. These originate in China and Russia area. That's where these came from. Hardy kiwis. Yeah, there's many varieties of them, but yeah, it's one that I definitely recommend. You're going to need a trellis, or if you've got some established trees that you're okay with, they get pretty aggressive though, so I'd probably recommend like some trellising and or fences, but I'll probably toy around with using trees as trellises too. But these things, they produce in abundance too. One of these vines can produce up to 100 pounds of this fruit in a season. So you'll have more than you possibly know what to do with. Yeah.
I have a question.
Okay. Yeah, that could be. There's a number of ways with most fruits, ways you can train them and try to increase fruiting. Some things need to be pruned. A lot of things need to be pruned annually, but some things need to be pruned certain ways. So I can't specifically speak to the best way. I don't know the best way on how to train those, but you're going to want to do some training and some pruning. Now, if you don't do any of it, you're still going to get a lot of fruit. It's going to be harder to get access to it. That's all. Okay, what about this? What are we looking at here? Acorns. Who here has eaten acorns? Wow, we got a decent amount of people. Did anybody like them? We got one guy. Did you eat white oaks or red oaks?
The white oaks,
Yeah. Why did you eat the white oak?
they're not near as tart as the red ones.
That's right. That's right. They have less tannin in them. Now, the cool thing is they're all edible, and the Indians of this country, in some places, they were absolute staples in their diet. They ate them everywhere in this country, but in some places, that was one of the staple crops. And they knew how to take care of the real bitterness. They're water soluble. All you need to do is just give these rinses. There are different ways you can do it. You can do them whole after you peel them, and you can have them in they would throw them in little bags and streams. And after a few days, that running water just leached out all the tannins. You could, after you peel off the shell, you could just put them in a food processor, and then you just add water. You just keep doing pour-offs until your water gets clear. There are many ways you can do it. Then people make bread out of it. You can do all kinds of things. This one here is the bur oak, which probably grows down into here too. I think it does. I know it goes down into Texas, so it probably is here. These are one of the biggest white oak acorns, and they're also one of the sweetest. Those are humongous ones that I found on eBay. It's amazing what you can find on the internet. People are doing a lot of selling of seeds and plants on eBay for good prices, much better than you can get in a lot of nurseries. So anyways, I got a seed crop to plant because I try acorns anywhere I go if they're ripe, but a lot of the white oaks, as our brother said, they're sweet. And in this one, there were two that I had in particular. This one, the chinkapin, they were delicious right out of hand. Absolutely delicious. They're just like you'd eat a walnut, or like they're sweeter, in my opinion, than a walnut. But they had a good nutty flavor with no bitter aftertaste. So it's just something to consider too. There's a tremendous amount of benefits to oak trees. I mean, shade, lumber. Why not grow something that can do a whole bunch of different things for you and give you a fruit crop? They produce in abundance, but this has something to do with sin and the curses. So I can't explain all the mechanics of it. But a lot of wild fruit and a lot of wild nuts, they don't produce consistently year after year. You know, they can be biannual or masting trees. Masting meaning maybe every 3 to 5 years they'll have a huge crop. The other years they'll have small crops. And I've heard different things as to why that might be. I mean, ultimately, again, it's because of what we've done to our Savior, you know, and that we brought a curse upon ourselves. And so the creation reflects that. As we know, that's how the thorns and the thistles came, and then all the seasons never existed. There was never any death, so we had fruit and food all the time. Animals never killed other animals. They had to do that, otherwise they would have all starved and died. So many things, and so but it all stems back to, again, all these things that we observe in nature. There's a reason for it. We just don't really think much about, well, why is that the way it is? Yes, I heard chestnuts. We're about to talk about chestnuts. That's maybe one of my all-time favorite things. Okay, what's this before we get to chestnuts? Pecans. Where are pecans from? They're from this region, absolutely. They're from the south, south central than southeast. They've naturalized and they grow all the way. And we even grow up the northern hardy pecans into southern Wisconsin. They're smaller than the ones down here, but they do grow. And that, as you guys know, it's an amazing nut. And so that's something that I would encourage us again. You know, this is something that's native to our country. You know, we don't have to be. You can grow the English walnuts down here, I'll talk about that too. You can grow all these other nuts, but why not grow something that's native that gives such a delicious nut? And these are ones that where we're working on launching an outreach health center in the nearby town of Jasper, Eden Point Lifestyle Center. There's a lane there. It was gravel, but now they're redoing the whole city, and so this is really cool. And please pray for us. But our location where we're at is basically business number 1 on what will become the main route into the city, and they will put boardwalks through. And we didn't know this when Gary and Carolyn first purchased that building, you know, for the ministry. So this could become front and center to the whole town of Jasper, and it would be a great opportunity to get the truth out to people. But anyways, in doing that and expanding, they had a whole line of pecan trees along there. And when I came down, you know, again, I'm always looking around when I'm driving, looking at different trees, and I spotted those. And right before the nuts, actually right about when they were starting to ripen, they cut all of them down. All of them. Now, first they heavily pruned the branches, and so I'm like, oh man, really? But well, at least they're still there. Then 2 weeks later, they just decimated them. The beautiful thing is there's some redemption that comes out of this. I'll show you in a different slide. We got access to all that wood for free, and so we're planning, you know, by the grace of God, to mill those logs and see. It's supposedly just like hickory. It's supposed to be really good cabinet wood, you know, kind of good for furniture pieces. So I have no experience with it, but I'm eager to learn, and so we'll see about toying around with that. What's this? Black walnut. Where are they from? America, absolutely. Where is the undisputed black walnut capital of the country and in turn of the world? Somebody had for that the cakes that we ate, right, for the Passover meal. Those had walnuts in them. Do you guys? They had black walnuts in them. And there was a company by the name of Hammond's. They're the only company in the country that shells and then sells black walnuts. Do you know how they get all those black walnuts? I just learned this as I was driving over here. I was doing some research. They have across like up to 4 to 6 states. They have about 16 different dehulling locations. They depend entirely upon the general public to sell nuts that they collect, to sell them to the company. So any of us can go out and do that. And that's how they get their black walnut crop. And so this is an awesome nut. The problem with this compared to an English walnut or a California walnut is the fact that, yeah, the shells we know is very, very thick. And the hull, like, with the English or California walnuts, it's like like some hickory nuts, like the shagbark that I'm familiar with in the north, it opens up, right, and the nut falls out. Yeah, these don't, as you know, but there's a lot of medicine in that green hull. So you can learn about that. It's incredibly antifungal, anti-parasitic, so you can dry those hulls. I've done it. Don't recommend drinking tea from that, but I did. That was hard. I've got a pretty strong stomach, but that almost came up. That was wicked stuff. So there's a lot of good medicine in that as well. But yeah, it's hard to crack into, but it's still worth it because, what else is so valuable about that tree? The lumber. That stuff is amazing. That is so beautiful. And so that's just, we'll talk about some of the different ways that you can incorporate like different systems of growing your food and your timber crops together, and how they're starting to pay more attention to black walnuts now. And they're growing them out, starting to grow orchards of these things out. Okay, that was the kiwi. I guess I got another kiwi picture that I threw in there somehow. Okay, now this is the other walnut. This is the one that we always all have ever known if we buy walnuts in the store, except for Hammond's black walnuts. This is what a lot of us know it as is either the California walnut or the English walnut. Has anybody heard of Persian walnuts? Okay, the Persian walnut is the English walnut, which is the California walnut. It's just changed names. So they all originated, thus the Persian walnut, in that same area, the same area that Neil is talking about. The largest remaining walnut forests in the world are in that area of Kyrgyzstan. And you can find, there used to be, I think, millions of acres of these walnut forests. Now there's only hundreds of thousands left. But this is still, this keeps these small towns in that region, this keeps them, this is the only thing that keeps them going, is they all go out in September, October, and the entire villages, they go out and they harvest the walnuts. They recognize them as there's a lot of medicinal benefits to them, but then they're eating them as well, but then they're selling them all. And so their tourism is starting to improve in that region, so they're inviting people in from outside of the world. And they're pretty conservative people in that, I don't know what their major religious beliefs are, but I think there are a lot of different Christian denominations there, but it sounds, just from what I was reading, they're very friendly. It doesn't seem, I would maybe do more research, but it's a place that I'm very interested in. There is some mission work going on within Adventism in that area. Maybe some people know about it. I've just heard a little bit, but I'm interested in exploring that myself and visiting the people here and learning on how, because these are people that haven't strayed as far away from their dependence on the land like modern day, Americans have, for instance. And so we can learn. There's a lot we can learn from this.
Is that in Missouri?
Hammond's is in Missouri. Correct. So here's some of the pictures. This is what these walnut forests look like. And there's more than just walnuts in these forests, and I'll mention that here. There's the mountains. There's some of the area where these are on the slopes. It's just amazing country. And it's definitely something that's on my heart. So, Lord willing.
Close where the ark landed, right?
What's that?
You said that's close to
Yeah, absolutely. This is all. It's all connected. It's all stemming out from that origin, and then it's just spread.
plant those trees.
It's definitely possible. Here's what's fascinating. Science is doing some studies they took samples of genetics from the trees from all different parts of their range, and they found that what they were expecting is that there would be an extreme amount of genetic diversity. That they realized is there isn't as much as they thought, so that it was spread, selected by people over time. So originally, it would have started, Noah preserved it, or God saw fit to preserve it, or he in his providence had nuts that made it through the flood, and then, this whole thing sprang up. And so not far from here, too, I guess this is a good time to tell you. So the apples I talked about, you can find those apples in this forest. Cherries, all the cherries that we eat come from this forest. Raspberries, almonds, apricots, pistachios, they all exist in wild forests over in this area. Still, now they're threatened and they're being destroyed, and little by little we're losing more and more of it. But it's still there. It's still there.
Where is that?
This is in, it's a region of eastern Kazakhstan and Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan and a number of stands.
Is that where is that? Missouri?
Oh, no. This is over in like Eastern Europe, Western Asia, kind of that center around there. Okay, we know that. We answered that question. What's this? Nope. This is the most unusual one you've ever seen, so it would be hard to guess. Pomegranates. Look at that pomegranate. Has anybody ever seen one like that? Apparently somebody in California, I found this when I was doing some research just on the way over here. Somebody in California had this, and they posted pictures of it, and all these people on this forum, they were interested in growing food. They're all freaking out about this because who's ever seen a black, dark, what they call a black pomegranate with white seeds there? So they're asking, and this guy was so generous, he's like, oh yeah, just give me your address and just cover shipping and I'll send you guys stuff. So I found that it was like 2 years old, but he has email, so I emailed him. He said, oh yeah, just pay for shipping and I'll send you some. So we might be pushing it where we're at, might be a little too cold. These might freeze back to the ground, but there are some pomegranates that will grow in North Georgia, so therefore they'll grow here. So it's definitely something to consider playing around with, or pomegranates. Where do pomegranates originate? Not quite. North and probably slightly, no, more north of the Mediterranean. Northern Iran and upward, all the way into Nepal. So it kind of shares some of that same range again of all the rest of the fruits we're talking about. But there's a Soviet, I guess, fruit explorer, researcher who went over to northern Iran, and he went into some of the remaining wild pomegranate forests. Again, just wild pomegranates growing everywhere. Beautiful fruit, all different flavors. See, this is, again, the only pomegranates we ever eat in this country. At most now, I think it's coming from 4 varieties, but pretty much it's all only coming from one. It's called Wonderful. It is an heirloom. It's been around since the late 1800s, but that's primarily the only one we've ever tasted. And now at a home scale in small nurseries, you can get access to a lot more. But I don't know ultimately how many varieties there were. I've seen suggestions, but this Soviet researcher who went over there and started an orchard, and he collected from many different countries, and then he started sending stuff back to like UC Davis and to other areas to try to preserve what he found in the wild, because that's what he did. He just grabbed what he deemed to be superior varieties from the wild, whether that be size, whether it be flavor, whether it be sweeter, you name it. And he came up with an orchard collection of over 1,000 varieties of pomegranates. It's amazing. And so this is one of the most unique of the unique here. And this didn't come out of his collection. The guy didn't actually remember where he got it from. But I just thought that was amazing. I'm just trying to show you guys, this even despite sin and despite the loss of diversity and the corruption and how we've destroyed this earth, God has still given us such an incredible abundance of food. So here you go. There's the origin of the pomegranate. And that's, again, from that area of northern Iran and then northward all the way into India and Nepal. So, yeah, your son, I would imagine maybe he didn't realize, but I'm sure he's walked past pomegranates at some point or another. Let's see. Oh, I guess it's on a different slide. Well, this one's bamboo. A lot of good things about bamboo. There's 2 types. There's clumping and there's running. I did the loop the other day on Sulphur Springs, and closer to us is a patch that somebody had planted of bamboo. It's a running bamboo, so it can get pretty invasive, so people get scared about that. So if you're interested in bamboo, I would probably encourage you to at least start with the clumping bamboo before you just let it run wild, unless you're really okay with it. But obviously this is a traditional building material for all the areas where this is found. This is what people have used, for thousands of years, and it can be very strong and durable. I mean, you can get, bamboo timbers that are like this big around. And I mean, I'm sure any of you missionaries who've been in any of these areas, you've lived in, stayed in, helped build stuff with bamboo. And
South Africa had some pretty good size ones.
that's right. We did see some huge clumping bamboo. Those were monsters. And so I'm sure some of you know this too, but in addition to being an incredible source of building material, it's also quite edible. All bamboo is edible. Some I've heard are better than others, but it's really only edible when it's like asparagus, in the springtime when the young shoots get up. And so when I was walking, I never gotten to try bamboo before. And so I was walking the other day, and there's a whole bunch of shoots. The patch has gone all the way out to the road, and they just, they mowed the ditches down, it just keeps growing back from its rhizomes. And so they were like asparagus-sized spears. You just had to peel the outer layer. And I didn't know what to expect, but I was excited. It was amazing. It was nice and it was like tender yet crisp, and it had like a slight asparagus flavor to it. So really, really a cool perennial. That's a perennial food crop. So just something fun to play with. And you know, for those of you who are interested in, we'll talk about this, just the benefits of mulch. You know, if you can grow your own mulch supply, that's fantastic. So bamboo obviously would be an incredible candidate for regenerative mulch. So you can grow and cut back year after year, and then if you got a wood chipper, you can do that, or any number of things. So yeah, just something cool to consider there. I'm going to talk about chestnuts. I guess I didn't move the chestnuts over to this presentation. I'll just have it on that last slide there. That was a cool view. Where we are in Talking Rock is the southernmost slopes of the Appalachians. And so short distance up the road from us, there's some overlooks. And you can see Atlanta 65 miles away, you know, on a clear day. But it's amazing because it does. You literally just drops off into just these light rolling Piedmont hills. So you look like, it feels like you're on the edge, which I guess we really were. And so back to chestnuts. Has anybody ever eaten an American chestnut? Has anybody had the privilege of that? No? You've collected them? Where did you find them? That's amazing. So does anybody know what happened to the American chestnut? Blight. Okay, let me... I want to say if I ask this in a question. I'll make a statement. The American chestnut, maybe you could make a case that single-handedly that was the resource that allowed our pioneers, you know, and the homesteaders of the Appalachian Mountains to be as self-sufficient as they were. Because everything about that tree is like, it's incredible. The wood, it's basically one of the fastest growing hardwoods of all the hardwood trees. So from a lumber standpoint, the stuff's extraordinary in that it was light, but also extremely rot resistant. It has a very high tannin. So a lot of the tannin industry, where we get tannins before we do it with chemicals now, was coming from American chestnuts. So you can do all your tanning, your leather, all that stuff with that. But the tree itself, that's what they basically built everything with: churches, barns, homes, and the nuts. There's like basically 3 or 4 different varieties of chestnuts in the world. Again, all stemming from one place. That's what we got to remember. I mean, it's God who's created all these things. And then as things spread out, then they acclimatize to their local region with different climate because of sin. All that changes. So then they're going to change slightly as well. But they're all similar in that the pollen would be accepted from, so you have Chinese chestnuts, you have Japanese chestnuts, you have European sweet chestnuts, they call them, and then American chestnuts. Of all the chestnuts, in my opinion, I think a lot of people would agree with that too, that know about it, but this one is superior in a sense that these were the redwood of the East. I really encourage you guys, if you look up, you know, historic American chestnut photos and you do an image search, there's pictures of families of 4 standing shoulder to shoulder with the chestnuts still bigger than they are across. Some of these things were over 12 feet in diameter. Monster trees. Yeah, they're just an incredible tree. And so shortly before, you know, the prophet died, before Ellen White died, blight showed up in this country. And it came because we imported, well, it all comes because of sin, but when we imported Chinese chestnuts, because for whatever reason, this is bizarre, when people became interested in growing chestnuts like in an orchard setting, not just gathering them out of the wild, they didn't look at American chestnuts, maybe because they thought they were too big, but they looked to the smaller version, the Chinese chestnut. One, because it is a smaller tree compared to the American, but its nuts are bigger. The American chestnut also is superior in that it's the sweetest of all the chestnuts, but it is also the smallest. So I think the appeal was, well, the Chinese is bigger, let's bring that over. Well, it was resistant to a fungal disease that was there in China and Japan, but ours hadn't had any experience to that. So that showed up, and then it showed up in New York at a botanical garden or a zoo or something in Brooklyn, and then this thing just spread like wildfire. And then the government solution, they didn't know any better, and everybody jumped on. Not everybody, but it's always, you know, the people with the loudest voices and the most dollars win. There were different approaches as to how to deal with this. There were a handful of people that said, because the big strategy is how to contain this blight from wiping out all the chestnuts, which our country depended massively on. the Appalachian homesteaders would use chestnuts as currency. They would gather them all up, they would take them to the rails, and they would get paid, or they would take them to the shops and the stores, would trade with them, and then now they all end up going to the rails to get shipped all over the place to like New York City and all these places. This was commonplace in American culture, but now it's almost unheard of today. And so their solution was, well, we're just going to cut everything down. We'll just cut all the chestnuts out so that we can stop it. So they started in first with the state where it was, and that'll stop it. We'll cut them all out. Well, they tried and it failed. And it's impossible because you walk and your boots get the spores on them, and then everywhere you go, you carry it with you, and then birds carry it with you. And so despite their best attempts, it kept going. But where they majorly failed is by cutting everything out, they cut down ones that would have had natural resistance. So today, the only ones that are in existence that get large enough to bear nuts seem to have some resistance. So back at that time when they were trying to do what do we do about this, because this was millions and millions of dollars. Today it would have been billions of dollars of industry with these trees, with their lumber and their food. So this is a big deal. And so at the time there were a few who said, no, that strategy is going to fail. It's not going to work. You know, we've studied the disease. We know how virulent it is. We got to just try to look for ones that have natural resistance to it and then propagate those out from seed. And so there's a small group of people that are trying to, they've been doing probably for a few decades, go out into the wild and find where there still are American chestnuts, and they're collecting them and growing them out, and then they're giving to people to try to do the same. So we'll see what happens. But I've got chestnuts. I've planted them, American chestnuts. They're actually growing right now, and so we got them in the greenhouse. As soon as frost danger is past, we'll plant them out, expecting full well that there's a very strong likelihood they'll get disease. But as I share in a couple other presentations, I'm also, some people maybe say foolish, but I think I have, biblical and spirit prophecy weight of evidence to suggest that I don't think it's a completely hopeless endeavor to try. So with that, I think this is just a sampling, guys. I mean, you name it. You name your favorite fruit, your favorite nut, your favorite vegetable. And if we've spent all this time trying to study, all the planets and the solar systems and outer space, and we create all these computers, and we do, you name it. We've done some really amazing technological marvels. And if we've put all this time, energy, money into that, I would pose it's fair to say that maybe we should put a little bit more attention and money into where our food comes from. Not just to know where it comes from for the sake of knowing, but to know what can we learn of God first through that, and through how much He loves us and what He's preserved for us, but then how does that apply to us in these last days in considering living closer to the land and growing our own food? Yes?
What about using volcanic ash for fertilizer?
Yeah, you definitely could do that. It's high in minerals. High in minerals, absolutely. Well, Washington State has got, in Hawaii, there's really rich volcanic soils. So yeah, you're going to have high different mineral concentrations of trace minerals. So yeah, absolutely.
Is there a source that you have to get that?
No, I don't. There's a lot of different mineral, trace mineral sources that you can use. Like I'm sure some people have heard of dehydrated seawater. That's another thing that you can do. One of the things that I am the biggest proponent of currently, because I think it's more in alignment with how things work in nature, is, I don't know if you guys would have heard of it at all, but humic and fulvic acid. So I don't know if anybody knows of that. Okay, so that's, and I'll talk about in another presentation, but just briefly, when organic matter breaks down from all the plant material, after the leaves fall off the trees or trees die and all that, through microorganisms that gets broken down, and out of death comes life. Principle of the cross and the atonement, right? It's just showing us this principle that the same power to create, the creation is redemption. And so we see this in what appears to be every year, everything looks dead. And it looks like, but yet out of the amazing grace and love, of our Savior, He brings it back to life every spring. So that's telling us what can happen in our own hearts if we believe. It's the same thing as in our object book. But anyways, so when all that stuff breaks down, it breaks down in these smaller molecules, which are incredible acids that bind and hold on to all of the minerals, so they keep everything from leaching away, which is what all of our modern agriculture has done. So you can get access to, let me back up. So that happens continuously year after year everywhere, but it's more concentrated, and you can get it in a mine-formed shale. So shale is just basically compressed organic material. Not only organic material, minerals too, but there are sources of shale that are very, very high in organic material. Do you know where that's from? That's from the flood. That's from buried forests. And so they're tapping into this stuff today all over the world, but there's a lot of it going on in the Dakotas, in New Mexico, and then I even found a little bit going on in Mississippi. And so they're extracting out this humic shale, which is high organic material, but what's in that are these acids, these humic and fulvic acids, which are vital to our health, by the way. We're absolutely connected to this, yeah.
We have a lot of shale here in Arkansas.
Yeah, if it's high organic material shale, then you're good. You know, I mean, look, all rock is good. There isn't any bad rock, but there's some that you specifically has high organic matter because of all that vegetation that was buried underneath the sediment of the flood. And so that contains a spectrum, so broad spectrum of minerals, and then levels that are off the charts with our soil today. And so you can get that stuff in liquid form or in pulverized solid form, and the evidence is irrefutable with scientific trials across the board with anything you could ever think of. It does incredible things with your crops. So again, we'll get into more of the details with that, but that's just an alternative to the conventional approach of, well, let's just use, chemically derived fertilizers and synthetic materials. It's a different. If we can learn to understand it, we'll see that it's coming from a different perspective. Again, more in alignment with how are things going on in nature, rather than us needing to fertilize because we have destroyed the soil. So it's all about how we approach the problems that we face, and realizing the problems that we face were created by us. And so it's back to the whole idea of, the people at the foot of Sinai, when they said all that the Lord has said we will do. It's, do we believe that God really will provide for all of our needs? Or do we believe we have to manufacture it in and of ourselves and produce these things and use these things? Maybe there is a time and a place for the use of some of the more conventional approaches, but I would make a case, and hopefully after we share some stuff, that by and large, not only is it not necessary, but it's actually hurting us. And so we want to look at this because, again, God has given us these examples to show us that the very same thing that I am doing out in nature and resurrecting life, bringing forth life from death, I want to do in your heart. And so hopefully we can have more of an appreciation for that process. So thanks, guys. An incredible tree. And so shortly before, the prophet died, before Ellen White died, blight showed up in this country. And it came because we imported, it all comes because of sin, but when we imported Chinese chestnuts, because for whatever reason, this is bizarre, when people became interested in growing chestnuts like in an orchard setting, not just gathering them out of the wild, they didn't look at American chestnuts, maybe because they thought they were too big, but they looked to the smaller version, the Chinese chestnut. One, because it is a smaller tree compared to the American, but its nuts are bigger. The American chestnut also is superior in that it's the sweetest of all the chestnuts, but it is also the smallest. So I think the appeal was, well, the Chinese is bigger, let's bring that over. Well, it was resistant to a fungal disease that was there in China and Japan, but ours hadn't had any experience to that. So that showed up, and then it showed up in New York at a botanical garden or a zoo or something in Brooklyn, and then this thing just spread like wildfire. And then the government solution, they didn't know any better, and everybody jumped on. Not everybody, but it's always, the people with the loudest voices and the most dollars win. There were different approaches as to how to deal with this. There were a handful of people that said, because the big strategy is how to contain this blight from wiping out all the chestnuts, which our country depended massively on. The Appalachian homesteaders would use chestnuts as currency. They would gather them all up, they would take them to the rails, and they would get paid, or they would take them to the shops and the stores, would trade with them, and then now they all end up going to the rails to get shipped all over the place to like New York City and all these places. This was commonplace in American culture, but now it's almost unheard of today. And so their solution was, well, we're just going to cut everything down. We'll just cut all the chestnuts out so that we can stop it. So they started in first with the state where it was, and that'll stop it. We'll cut them all out. Well, they tried and it failed. And it's impossible because you walk and your boots get the spores on them, and then everywhere you go, you carry it with you, and then birds carry it with you. And so despite their best attempts, it kept going. But where they majorly failed is by cutting everything out, they cut down ones that would have had natural resistance. So today, the only ones that are in existence that get large enough to bear nuts seem to have some resistance. So back at that time when they were trying to do what do we do about this, because this was millions and millions of dollars. Today it would have been billions of dollars of industry with these trees, with their lumber and their food. So this is a big deal. And so at the time there were a few who said, no, that strategy is going to fail. It's not going to work. You know, we've studied the disease. We know how virulent it is. We got to just try to look for ones that have natural resistance to it and then propagate those out from seed. And so there's a small group of people that are trying to, they've been doing probably for a few decades, go out into the wild and find where there still are American chestnuts, and they're collecting them and growing them out, and then they're giving to people to try to do the same. So we'll see what happens. But I've got chestnuts. I planted them, American chestnuts. They're actually growing right now, and so we got them in the greenhouse. As soon as frost dangers pass, we'll plant them out, expecting full well that there's a very strong likelihood they'll get disease. But as I share in a couple other presentations, I'm also, some people maybe say foolish, but I think I have, biblical and spirit prophecy weight of evidence to suggest that I don't think it's a completely hopeless endeavor to try. So with that, I think this is just a sampling, guys. I mean, you name it. You name your favorite fruit, your favorite nut, your favorite vegetable. And if we've spent all this time trying to study, all the planets and the solar systems and outer space, and we create all these computers, and we do, you name it. We've done some really amazing technological marvels. And if we've put all this time, energy, money into that, I would pose it's fair to say that maybe we should put a little bit more attention and money into where our food comes from. Not just to know where it comes from for the sake of knowing, but to know what can we learn of God first through that, and through how much He loves us and what He's preserved for us. But then how does that apply to us in these last days in considering living closer to the land and growing our own food? Yes?
What about using volcanic ash for fertilizer?
Yeah, you definitely could do that. It's high in minerals. High in minerals, absolutely. Well, Washington State has got, in Hawaii, there's really rich volcanic soils. So yeah, you're going to have high different mineral concentrations of trace minerals. So yeah, absolutely.
Is there a source that you have to get that?
No, I don't. There's a lot of different mineral, trace mineral sources that you can use. Like I'm sure some people have heard of dehydrated seawater. That's another thing that you can do. One of the things that I am the biggest proponent of currently, because I think it's more in alignment with how things work in nature, is, I don't know if you guys would have heard of it at all, but humic and fulvic acid. So I don't know if anybody knows of that. Okay, so that's, and I'll talk about in another presentation, but just briefly, when organic matter breaks down from all the plant material, after the leaves fall off the trees or trees die and all that, through microorganisms that gets broken down, and out of death comes life. Principle of the cross and the atonement, right? It's just showing us this principle that the same power to create, the creation is redemption. And so we see this in what appears to be every year, everything looks dead. And it looks like, but yet out of the amazing grace and love, of our Savior, He brings it back to life every spring. So that's telling us what can happen in our own hearts if we believe. It's the same thing as in our object book. But anyways, so when all that stuff breaks down, it breaks down in these smaller molecules, which are incredible acids that bind and hold on to all of the minerals, so they keep everything from leaching away, which is what all of our modern agriculture has done. So you can get access to, let me back up. So that happens continuously year after year everywhere, but it's more concentrated, and you can get it in a mine form shale. So shale is just basically compressed organic material. Not only organic material, minerals too, but there are sources of shale that are very, very high in organic material. Do you know where that's from? That's from the flood. That's from buried forests. And so they're tapping into this stuff today all over the world, but there's a lot of it going on in the Dakotas, in New Mexico, and then I even found a little bit going on in Mississippi. And so they're extracting out this humic shale, which is high organic material, but what's in that are these acids, these humic and fulvic acids, which are vital to our health, by the way. We're absolutely connected to this, yeah.
We have a lot of shale here in Arkansas.
Yeah, if it's high organic material shale, then you're good. Look, all rock is good. There isn't any bad rock, but there's some that you specifically has high organic matter because of all that vegetation that was buried underneath the sediment of the flood. And so that contains a spectrum, so broad spectrum of minerals, and then levels that are off the charts with our soil today. And so you can get that stuff in liquid form or in pulverized solid form, and the evidence is irrefutable with scientific trials across the board with anything you could ever think of. It does incredible things with your crops. So again, we'll get into more of the details with that, but that's just an alternative to the conventional approach of, well, let's just use chemically derived fertilizers and synthetic materials. It's a different. If we can learn to understand it, we'll see that it's coming from a different perspective. Again, more in alignment with how are things going on in nature, rather than us needing to fertilize because we have destroyed the soil. So it's all about how we approach the problems that we face, and realizing the problems that we face were created by us. And so it's back to the whole idea of the people at the foot of Sinai, when they said all that the Lord has said we will do. It's, do we believe that God really will provide for all of our needs? Or do we believe we have to manufacture it in and of ourselves and produce these things and use these things? Maybe there is a time and a place for the use of some of the more conventional approaches, but I would make a case, and hopefully after we share some stuff, that by and large, not only is it not necessary, but it's actually hurting us. And so we want to look at this because, again, God has given us these examples to show us that the very same thing that I am doing out in nature and resurrecting life, bringing forth life from death, I want to do in your heart. And so hopefully we can have more of an appreciation for that process. So thanks, guys. Any other questions or comments?